Okay, we're back on.
Start.
Yep.
After being honorably discharged in August of 2000 and
No,
yeah, right, 2000, in 1946, I enrolled at Northern Michigan University, and I roomed the first year with Clyde Schultz, who taught with me here in Roscommon. We had a really, really good time. Then when Clyde brought his wife down to Marquette, why, then I had rooms in different rooming houses until the point that I graduated. After graduation, I was very fortunate. I graduated on a Sunday afternoon, and I started work for Department of Social Services in Houghton County the very next day. So I didn't have a vacation my first year out of college, but I was lucky to have a job. They were very difficult to find at that time. You couldn't get a job in teaching, so I took a job in social work. And it was very nice and rewarding. Well, after a successful first year, the Department of Social Services asked me to go to Pontiac, where I worked for them as a children's worker in the children's division, investigating boarding houses and people that had children for board and all those type of things. Children that were abused, taken from their homes, and I'd go investigate their homes, and very, very interesting. That summer when I was in Pontiac, it was nice because I got to go to 32 Detroit baseball games in Detroit.
Nice
and
work.
That was good work. I always made sure that my calls were down on the southern end of Oakland County so that when my day was over, I could drive into Detroit and go to the ballpark. So it's really a lot of fun. Well, after a year or better down in the Pontiac area, I got a telephone call from my good friend Clyde Schultz, and he said there was an opening in Roscommon for a teacher. And Clyde said, why didn't I come up? Well, I had to start teaching that year. I'd lose my teaching certificate. So I resigned my job as a social worker and came to Roscommon. And the first year was very, very interesting. I had a class composed of 6th and 7th graders, all wonderful kids. And it was a great time. I started going to Central Michigan University to work on my master's degree by taking classes every Saturday. And I'd drive down in the spring and in the fall, and after a couple of years I had my master's degree. Clyde drove down with me, and so we both were taking classes at Central. After my first year in Roscommon, why, Superintendent Elwin Hulse asked if I'd take over the government class and driver ed and world history at high school level, so I did. And that was really rewarding. My first year there, since my really interest was in counseling and guidance, I gave up my free period, so to speak, preparation period, and started the guidance program in Roscommon. They hadn't had one.
The what?
The guidance program.
Oh,
guidance and testing program.
Oh.
They hadn't had one. They didn't have any standard program for testing youngsters insofar as intelligence and aptitude and interests and that, so I started that program. So after my...
Let me just ask, what year was that?
This was... well, my first year in Roscommon that I came here was the fall of 1952. And so the year then that I started this particular program was when I moved to high school in the fall of 53. And then in the fall of 54, I was given 50% of my time to counseling and guidance, and then I taught the government class and the driver ed through the summers.
Oh.
And so it worked out real well. I got my master's in 55. Then I started on my ed specialist at Central Michigan University.
What was your master's in?
My master's was in education, and
Okay.
they didn't have a specialty at the college level for counseling and guidance at that time. Although I had a minor in that at Northern Michigan University. My major was
With your
sociology,
bachelor's.
and second, my minor was history, and then guidance and counseling, and my other minor at Northern was economics, but I never taught a class in economics. It's interesting, but none of the schools offered economics at that point in time. So I got my ed specialist in 1962 from Central. And at that point in time, I was offered a job at Central Michigan University. So I left Roscommon in the summer, in June of 1962. It's interesting, my last day on the job was on a Friday, and Central sent me up to Beaver Island to teach a driver education class up at Beaver Island, and I was up there on Sunday. So that was the second time in my life that I started a new job without a vacation.
Yeah, I guess you did.
But that was fun, teaching up at Beaver Island. So at that point, I'll let you ask questions.
Okay.
And that's my educational
Background.
situation.
Yeah. So you were here from 52 to 62.
52 to 62, right.
Okay.
They were really, really good years. And that, why I was here, I should tell you this. I bought a lot and built a house just to the west of the golf course. And when I left in 62, I sold my house to Jim Mahoney. And he was only in it a very short time, and the highway department decided to come through that property and put I-75.
Oh, yeah. So you had built that house.
I had built that house, right.
They
So
moved
Jim
it,
had
didn't
the opportunity of moving it, and so he moved it down to where it was located, across the street, roughly speaking, from Squire Mead on Division Street, and still there.
Yeah.
He had
that's
done
on
it
the
still.
corner of Division and George.
Right, corner Division and George. And it's interesting how the house sold. I had a little boat and motor, and Jim was an avid fisherman, and so he looked at the house and 12 acres, and he said, gee, I like this and that. And then I had a little boat and motor. He said, gee, I love to fish. I don't know if I can ever afford a boat and motor. Well, I said, why don't I do this? Why don't I let you have that and just add the price on, which was $250, to the cost of the house. And so Jim was thrilled to pieces, and so that sold house.
Great. Great.
It was really good.
Okay, I just want to ask a little bit about where did you meet your wife?
Okay, I got on a bowling team with my good friend Moreland Dutton, and I became real good friends with Moreland and Dutton, and my wife, Clare Fisher, was a really good friend of Moreland and Thelma, and so consequently I started dating Clare, and we'd double date with Moreland and Thelma and go out to dinner and things like that, and so we got along real well, and so we married in the fall of 1953. And then I started on the house.
Was she a native here?
Clare wasn't an original native here. In fact, for when she was 12 years old, she lived up in Lawrence on the Upper Peninsula.
Really?
As her father worked for the U.S. Forest Service. He was the head mechanic where they had U.S. Forest Service vehicles and everything. So he traveled all over. And at the time that I met Clare, her father worked out at the experiment station as a pattern maker. He made a lot of patterns and helped design and work on all the different fire equipment that he had out there. He retired from the Forest Service and went with the other division of Forest Service, which was the experiment station.
Oh.
And
retired from one and was hired at the other?
Right.
Oh.
Just a different division of it. And that was interesting. A very fine gentleman. Her mother was a very nice lady. Clare and I got along real well. We weren't, unfortunately, able to have children, but of course, being a teacher, I had a lot of children.
Yeah. Did she work outside the home?
Yeah, she did. Clare worked, when I met her, she was working for Dow Chemical, who had a division here for an oil company. And
in Roscommon?
In Roscommon.
No
in
kidding.
Roscommon. But then they moved out of Roscommon, and then she started working for the Department of Natural Resources.
What has she done for Dow? What kind of work?
Well, office work. She was a secretary in the
Uh-huh.
office work. Actually, she was the executive secretary for the gentleman that managed the office.
And they had an office in Roscommon?
They had an office in Roscommon located where the Jansen Plumbing Company building is. That was their office in Roscommon. Bob Jansen and plumbing.
Do you think Dow built that building?
I don't think they built the building. No, it was not an original building to them. They rented it, and then, of course, when they left, Mr. Jansen bought the building.
Oh, okay.
But they had an awful lot of employees here at that particular time, and they did an awful lot of leasing and drilling samples and everything such as that. But then they went to Texas.
Oh. Then what did she do when they left, when Dow left?
When Dow left, my wife secured employment with the Department of Natural Resources, and she worked there until we decided to leave, and I went to Central Michigan University.
She worked in the district office? Or the
district office
regional?
right here, right. And all that building has been moved and is now the Sable Canoe Museum here in Roscommon.
Yeah,
but that was the building for the,
Riverside.
that was the building for the regional Department of Natural Resources. Very nice.
Yeah.
The Natural Resources office had a lot of wonderful, wonderful people, several of whom taught in the school system.
Mm-hmm. Did she retire from the DNR then?
No, she didn't retire because we were
young.
young. We went to Central Michigan University, and she became the executive secretary to the assistant dean of the School of Education. Then, of course, when he became the dean, she became his secretary also.
Great.
And so she did retire from Central 2 years after I retired because she wanted to have her 30 years in. And that, so, yeah.
And what did you do at Central? What did you teach there?
At Central, I taught driver education for Central, and I started working also in the guidance department, teaching classes and guidance, occupations and standardized testing. And I traveled many, many different towns that I taught classes in. I taught classes in Sheboygan, Petoskey, Sebewaing, Saginaw, all over for Central Michigan University.
So were you teaching other people to teach driver ed?
Yes, that was their basic class and also their advanced class in driver education at Central.
Huh.
Yeah.
And you did that how many years?
Well, I was full-time with Central for 2 years, so that would have been 1963 and 1964 and part of 1965. Then I took a job in the fall of 64 as the guidance director at the Clare Public School System, and I continued teaching at Central part-time for 20 more years.
You were doing core here?
No, not Clare.
What'd you say?
I was teaching guidance classes at Clare.
Oh, Clare.
At Clare.
I heard core.
And that, yeah, I was the guidance director for the Clare schools for 1965 until I retired in 1981. Then I continued teaching classes for Central until 1986.
Wow.
After I retired. In fact, I was honored just a few years ago at my age. They called me up and asked if I could help them out by going back and teaching a standardized testing class. I said, wow, I got rid of all my material and I'm a little old to get back in the swing of teaching classes. Of course, all the people that I had at Central, with the exception of the first 2 years, were adults. Working on their master's degrees, and that I didn't have undergraduates that were just starting Central. They were all older people.
Wow. Well, good for you. Okay, well, let's go back to Roscommon for these 10 years because I know. So then, when did you come back? When did you come back up and live here then?
Okay, while I was here, I met a wonderful lady when I bought the property to build my house on. Her name was May Malone. And so consequently, I got a real estate license with May, and I sold real estate part-time whenever there was any part-time, and it was a really good experience. So consequently, when I was in Clare, I had my own real estate broker's license and had a business. And I had a guy that helped me out that was crippled with multiple sclerosis, and he just did the office work and took the calls for me, but he taught almost everybody in Clare how to play cribbage. People would go and visit with him, and he couldn't get out to show property and things like that.
What was his name?
Whip Hankins, Hankins, wonderful, wonderful gentleman.
And what did you?
He stayed with me till he died.
What was your name of your business then?
Clare Realty.
Clare Realty.
My business in Clare was Clare Realty. But getting back to May Malone, May was a wonderful gal. The only problem that we had was the fact that May did everything on a handshake. There were no signed listings. People call her up and say, May, I'd like to sell my home. What do you think? I would like to get this. And May say, fine. Ask a little bit of information. And, well, needless to say, we sold more property that we never got paid for it, and we probably sold that we got paid for. But there were a lot of honest people. Moreland and Thelma, we sold their house and just on a handshake and that. And they had no quarrel with paying the commission. Sold a nice, expensive piece of property for Jess Green from Green's Tavern. He came in one day and said, May, sell that acreage for me, would you? And he was there 2 minutes, and May said, sure, Jess, anytime. So 2 weeks later, I sold it, and Jess came in and paid us our 10% commission. And, of course, my share of that commission was more than I made as a month of teaching. And,
so that was a good thing for you.
That was a very, very good thing.
Sure.
But I won't mention the names of the people that we sold property for that was very bad experiences. We didn't get a nickel. But anyway, it's still fun.
The handshake didn't work, huh?
No, the handshake with May didn't work. And I felt badly for May because a lot of them, she spent a lot of time going out and visiting the people, just writing it up. But we didn't have any signed listings. May did everything by a handshake. And, yeah, they were good friends and everything. Well, sometimes it doesn't work out.
Right, I bet not. Okay, well, now you have such an interest in our local history. So those 10 years that you were here, were you already dealing in postcards?
I started collecting postcards while I was here. I had a small number from my great-grandmother's house, and I wasn't trying to add to them until I got here. Thing was true with coins. I didn't really start collecting coins till I came to Roscommon. I had some, but I never ever thought of adding to them. But I had the opportunity to pick up a few, and so my interest developed. So you could say that I really started into postcards and coins probably in 1960. And that's a long time. And that right now, as far as postcards from my home area of Calumet and Lorium, I probably have the most extensive postcard collection of that area in the state of Michigan. And at one time, I probably did have the best token collection for that area in the state of Michigan. But in the early 90s, I was quite ill with heart problems, and so I sold the collection. But now, since I'm still here, I started rebuilding it, and arguably I'm probably in the top 4 or 5 as far as token collection. Postcard collection of that area, I'd probably be number 1 for the state of Michigan. But tokens would probably be in the top half dozen.
What all are you calling a token?
Well, a token is during the Depression and earlier. Let's say you went into a bar and had a glass of beer. All right, somebody ordered you one, and another person ordered you one, and you didn't want another one. So they gave you a token, good for 5 cents at Jess Green's Tavern, Roscommon. And you could go back and redeem it at any time. Well, how you got to accumulate tokens, a lot of people didn't go back to redeem it. And it wound up in their cigar box or dresser drawer back home. And that's how they wound up then in people's collections.
Were they usually metal or wooden?
Well, generally speaking, they're always metal, brass or aluminum. Brass or aluminum. And highly collectible. I was the editor for the newsletter for the Token Metal Society in Michigan for about 5 years. And we had a big, big membership. But as is happening in everything right now, younger people don't join organizations, and I think church leaders are finding that out. There aren't very many young people going to church these days. Well, the same thing is true with organizations such as Masonics, Knights of Columbus, and also with collectibles and that. So when I go to the token trading sessions, there aren't very many people there, whereas we used to have a great number of people at the token trading sessions. But that's what a token is. Then, of course, the banks would issue one. Good for $1 if you open up a deposit. And so people would collect a token for every bank they could get a hold of one. Then, when towns have their centennial, they issued a coin for 25 cents spendable to any merchant in Roscommon or whatever town there would happen to be. And so then you would try to get every centennial that was ever held in Michigan so that you had one. And very fascinating, very, very interesting. There's a wide variety of different tokens and medals that you can collect. Just this past year, I picked up a medal that was issued to a retiree of the Calumet Mining Company that was up in Calumet. And they were very kind to me while I was in college to let me work summers, and even at Christmas vacation they made room for me in the office to work, and even during Easter vacation at Calumet Mining Company. They're closed now. They closed in 1955. But I just bought a medal that was given to a man that retired after 25 years in 1916. It's a medal that is probably 5 inches in diameter, and it was issued, as I say, in 1916. And the medal on the front was the president of the mining company, Alexander Agassiz, who was a noted scientist, well-renowned throughout the whole United States, and he was president of the company. Well, the interesting thing about that medal, it was designed by Victor Dale Brenner, who is the designer of the Lincoln penny that started in 1909. I paid $500 for that medal. At one time I had one, but when I disposed of my huge collection, when I was having heart problems in the 90s, it went with the collection.
What is it made of?
Copper.
It's
Copper.
copper.
Beautiful, beautiful metal. Can you turn it off? I'll show it to you.
No, let's keep going.
Okay.
Let's keep going. That's wonderful. So you started these collections when you were here. So I want to know a little bit more about your postcard collection, I guess.
Okay. I started collecting Roscommon postcards when I was here during the 1950s, early 1960, and I collected everything that I could find that I didn't have, and I even buy duplicates for Higgins Lake, not to the same degree of Houghton Lake, and then every Roscommon card that I can find that is different. And I have quite a collection of that. Undoubtedly, it's the largest that there would be of this particular topic, because there's only 1 or 2 other people in the area that I know that work towards collecting Roscommon postcards. Mm-hmm. And I did shows every Saturday, not every Saturday, but a Saturday a month. I'd go to either Kalamazoo or Lansing or Detroit and take a table and buy and sell postcards, and go through every other dealer that had postcards and pick up every Roscommon that I didn't have.
Wow. So how many did you gather altogether?
Oh, I would imagine I probably have close to 1,000 different of Roscommon, Higgins Lake, and Yasable, and that. No, it's very, very interesting.
I was going to guess 150.
Oh no, I got closer to 1,000 cards.
Close to 2,000?
No, not 2,000, but closer to
8,000.
Closer to 1,000. Yeah, I would have closer to that. Yeah, it's a very, very interesting topic. And now there's 2 types of postcards, basically. One is a card that's a greeting card, a Christmas, Easter, Thanksgiving, what have you. The other postcard is a view card, which shows the main street of a town, the churches, the depot, and the railroad tracks, and things of that nature. Well, there's 2 types of view cards. One is a card that was taken, picture was taken by a photographer and is developed on film. And those you call real photos. And a photographer might come to Roscommon, or you might be lucky enough, as Roscommon was, to have a photographer that was quite a man who took pictures of different things around Roscommon and developed them on film. and then they printed it. And they are very limited numbers. I hunted for 15 years to get a real photo postcard of the depot in Roscommon.
Okay.
It took me 15 years. I found it. I paid $15 for it, and 2 weeks later I found the second one. It's often the case. Hunt for something for ages, and then you keep on going, and it isn't very long before you find the second one.
Wow.
So it's a.
And who took that picture then? Does it say on there?
In some instances, has the name of photographer on the front. Now, Fred Mann's Postcards, he was operating here about 1910 to maybe 1915, and his cards are very, very hard to find. But there are other photographers that took them, and like I say, in limited numbers. The drugstore at that point in time might have ordered 100 pictures. Of the Asable River, for example, that would be a very common postcard for this area. They might have ordered 500. They had them in the postcard display rack in the drugstore, and they sold maybe for a nickel. Now, the other postcard that's a printed postcard that they ran off on a printing press, they would buy by 1,000 because they could buy them for a penny a piece and get a nickel. So their margin of profit on a printed card was more than a real photo postcard.
Yeah, for heaven's sakes. Very interesting.
Yeah, postcards, if I could recommend to anybody that is young and likes history, why try to develop into postcards. And I'll give you a challenge. Try to get one postcard from every town in the state of Michigan. Now, for the towns that are still operating with a post office, you could probably accomplish that relatively easy in a couple years or so. But there's all kinds of towns in Michigan that are ghost towns or have lost their post office. And now it's a challenge to get a postcard from that town.
Sure.
I've been hunting for one from Giels, which was a train stop just to the east of Roscommon on Old 76. I haven't been able to locate it yet. I have a couple pictures of El Dorado, but then to get a postmark from El Dorado, which used to be called Jack Pine, is quite a challenge. So just in Roscommon County, to try to hit the towns that no longer have a post office is a challenge. That's just for Roscommon County.
Very interesting.
Well, history of your local area like that is very interesting. A lot of people like local history, but postcards are easy to get into, and there's a lot of people that collect them, and you can go to postcard shows and get cards that you like, and develop a nice little collection of your hometown.
Do you sell or buy on the internet now?
No, I sold my computer. It was getting to be a pain in the butt with the viruses and all the spam that you were getting. It's just taking too much time. And
so where do you have your collection currently?
There, and I got a big file in the bedroom and that.
Okay, so it's all here in your home?
It's all here in my home. Right? It's all here in the home.
Wonderful.
Yep.
And you're hoping to leave at least your Roscommon collection in the community.
Right, the Roscommon collection will be in the community, very possibly to the Historical Society if we can work something out, or if I don't leave it there, I will give them the cash equivalent of what it is worth, and that is a donation to do whatever they want to do with, and that it'll be one or the other.
Have the postcards at the library then, so...
That's the other possibility. Yeah. The postcards could go
really
to the library if they would like to keep them. But libraries are a little funny, and I don't mean to cast bad aspersions on anybody, but I used to collect old books too. And I had what was considered a very fine collection of Horatio Alger books. He had 112 titles, a couple that were ghostwritten for him under his name. And I had over 100 different titles of Horatio Alger's, and which is considered quite an accomplishment by the Horatio Alger Society. And I wanted to give it to a library, donate it to the library, but they weren't interested in old books. They were dated. insofar as their age that they were written. And so the library wasn't interested in having them. And then, of course, the other thing at that particular time for an author like Horatio Alger, they were a little bit bigoted insofar as colored people, and which was true of other authors at that particular time. And so they didn't want books that had any whatever bigotry in it, and that.
What did you do with all those books then?
I sold it. I traded it off. I sold it and traded it off for postcards. And it was a matter of room with all the books.
Sure.
And I did that. I had a complete collection of, with the exception of one book, which was very, very hard to find, of James Oliver Curwood.
Oh.
And I had all but one book of his. And I traded that collection to Andy Shervin for silver dollars.
Great.
And that.
So that's where his collection came originally from you.
No, Andy had quite a lot of them already, but there were around 7 titles or so that he did not have, and so then he bought the whole collection or traded me for silver dollars, and if I'm not mistaken, he donated his duplicates to the Historical Society. I think he did. I'm not positive.
I don't know. The collection that we have on display in the Galmer Boarding House was donated by Blaine Rutledge.
Okay.
His family was a personal friend of Mr. Curwood.
Right.
They knew him.
Right.
So I don't know if we have any of Andy's at this point. Going back to your teaching, and when you were here, you were also involved with the Masons, or no?
No, I wasn't involved in the Mason. I was Grand Knight for the Knights of Columbus. In the Knights of Columbus, I was here. I was very active in church. Used to usher and do other things at the church, and was very active in the Knights of Columbus. Very active in the Rotary Club at the time that I was here.
Well, tell us about that.
Well, at that time that I was in the Rotary Club for about half the time, the latter years that I was here, wonderful, wonderful people in the Roscommon Rotary Club, and that Charlie Pappenfuss was on the school board, and he built my house, and he was in it. The superintendent of schools, Elwin Holtz, was very active in the Rotary. The Matheson boys were active in the Rotary, and Bill Ingleson active in the Rotary. Harold Grieve, a wonderful gentleman who was the druggist here, was active in the Rotary, and I wish I could name everybody that was in the Rotary. There were about 30 of us at that time.
What were some of their main projects at that time?
Well, the main project that they helped with were things like helping the seniors go on their senior trip, and they donated money to just about every organization in town, $50 or $100 to help them out. They donated to all the churches. They donated for benches for the streets at that particular time, and just about anybody had a request for $100, $200, the Rotary tried to give it to them if it was something that improved the town.
Yeah. What was their main fundraising, the Rotary?
The main fundraising at that particular time were a couple dinners that they put on, and of course we had the dues, and then of course if you were late or you talked while the president was talking, there was a fine, and other little ways to raise money. Then, of course, there was a ticket sale, 50-50 raffle at every one of the meetings, and that went for donations. And they also put on a play every year that the Rotarians would act in that particular play. And one year it was really hilarious. We had a gentleman that by the name of Max Kelsey in the town. We used to call him Doc Kelsey because he was a former chiropractor, and he brought a play in called The Womanless Wedding. And we ran that for 2 nights in Roscommon, and it was hilarious. And of course, the most humorous part of the whole particular play was when the superintendent of schools, we dressed him up in a baby, and he was in a baby carriage at the end. And of course, that was close to the end of the play, and of course, everybody got the biggest bang when they saw the superintendent dressed up like an infant in a baby carriage.
That was still Mr. Hulse?
That was Mr. Hulse. Yeah. He had a good sense of humor. Yeah. And
where did you hold these plays?
At the high school auditorium.
Okay.
Which was the old auditorium. That's why I had to do 2 days. And then, of course, in the new auditorium, which was what is now the craft center, the main gym, had a stage at that particular time.
Late 50s, you were still in that first stage? The
early 50s were before we had the new addition onto the school, which is the craft center at the present time.
Which is the gymnasium now.
Which is the gymnasium and the room at the craft center that has all the machinery, which used to be the band room.
Right, and the stage.
Then it opened up onto a stage with they bricked that wall, so they made 2 separate areas at the present time.
Yeah. What year did they put that addition on? Were you here when they did that?
Yes, I was on it, and I used to time the basketball games and that. And I wrote my ed specialist thesis on the birth of a new school edition. And so I had all the paperwork from the time the idea started and copies of all the paperwork for that addition to the school. And they were so impressed with it that Central, when I turned it in for a class, they gave me an A+.
Great.
The Conception and Birth of a New School Edition was the title of the thesis.
How much did they add, in addition to the gymnasium and the band room and the stage?
They had a vocal area. The room, part of the band room, was for vocal music.
Okay. And that furnace room, was that added at that time?
Yes, the furnace room was added on. That was a selling point to get the building, is that the furnace was underneath the old gym. And so consequently, it burnt oil that was almost like sludge, tar sludge, and used to have to be pumped into where the furnace then burnt it. Well, of course, they thought, well, if a fire ever occurred, it would be a very dangerous situation. So they wanted to get that out of underneath the old high school. That was the selling point, really, for getting a new addition at that point. So
was there a basement under that?
Yeah, there is a basement under the old gym.
Really?
And part of the building, yes, there's a basement under there. Used for storage and where the furnace room was.
Wow.
Yeah.
See, I learn something new every day.
That's where, at that time, that teachers and probably even students, I didn't know about students, would sneak down to the basement down there to smoke. You had to enter it through a back door behind the high school and go down steps. And of course, if Mr. Bob Myers was there, why, he'd kick you out because he was the head maintenance man and that, but sometimes he had to do work out at the elementary school or what, and so people would sneak down there and have a cigarette and that. I never did myself, but...
So the years that you were teaching here, you were always in that building?
I was in that building, yes.
Yeah.
I was never at the new high school building.
Right, that wasn't until 73.
I did testing for the elementary schools, IQ tests and things like that at the elementary school building, but I was never in the old building. Never in the new building. That came later.
Yeah, right.
Which I understand is a state-of-the-art building. People that are considering building a new middle school or new high school come and visit Roscommon to get some ideas as to proper construction of a middle school or a high school. It's wonderful.
Yeah, it is. It's a very wonderful. Both of them are excellent buildings. So, it seems like one other time when we visited, you talked about some of the old buildings in town. I'm trying to think how that conversation went. Because you knew the history of some of these buildings.
Well, I wish I could remember all of them, and that the northern half of Baum's restaurant, which of course is now the Tin Fish, used to be the Northern Drugstore, and Mr. Grieve had a soda fountain in it, And Andy Shervin went to work for him and then took it over before he built his new drugstore, which is now the Board of Education building. And he put a soda fountain in his new building because people loved to go to a soda fountain like they had at the Northern drugstore.
Yeah.
And Mr. Grieve, Harold Grieve, his wife taught the 6th grade in, well, in fact, you're in their house, which is wonderful old house. That was their house.
Yeah.
Wonderful people.
Yeah. Did Mr. Grieve retire when Andy moved the drugstore down to the new building?
I think Mr. Grieve retired earlier, and Andy had the business to himself for a year or two before he designed and built the new building. Yes. Of course, I wasn't here at the time that he retired, and that. But Mr. Grieve is a great man. He was really active in the Rotary, and that he worked at drugstore to begin with, pretty much all by himself, and very nice, fine man. The Colonial Hotel used to be over in the area where the theater was at one time. Then they moved it to where it is at the present time. And Jess Green's original tavern was over that area because that was what was the main street of Roscommon at one time, where the theater is, and right across the Sawbo River Center. And then Jess Green has his present tavern that was moved. Let's see, any other buildings that I can think
I was
of?
trying to think of what, I can't remember what we talked about the other time.
Well, the school bus garage was located where the Ford Motor Company had their building, which was catty corner from St. Michael's Church. And at present, it's a very well-groomed lot that the gentleman that lived next door maintains and has it for a garden, and very, very beautiful lot. But that's when they tore the school bus garage down, which was the old Ford garage.
Yeah.
I can't tell you the year because I wasn't here at the time that they tore it down.
Early 90s, probably. I remember too, but I don't know. I remember it happening. I don't know what year it was. And so now, since you lived here, since when you retired, you moved back up here.
Right. When I retired in 1993, I moved back up here, and my wife passed away in 2003, and I moved into the Village Place condos here in 1994. Golly, I've been here since. Been here quite a few years. No, my wife died in 2003, so I moved into Village condos here in 2004.
So 8 years already.
Yeah, 8 years.
Yeah.
Hard to believe that time flies that fast.
I know, it's terrible. You said Charlie Pappenfuss built a house for you?
Yes, the one that was out just a little ways.
Because you built the first one. You built it yourself, you said.
Oh, no. I didn't build. Charlie Pap built it for me. I wish that...
the one you sold to Mahoney?
Right. Charlie Pap built the house.
Oh, okay.
No, I had bought the acreage and had the house built, and very nice, comfortable little home. Wasn't very big, but I had on a garage, and it was very nice.
The one out by the lake.
One out by the one out by the lake was my father and mother-in-law's house, and my brother-in-laws bought it from them, and they wanted to build a new home because they adopted what would have probably been a third or fourth cousin that needed a home when he was about age 5, 6, and thereabouts. So I said to my wife while we were in Clare, I said, why don't we go back up to Roscommon and buy your brother's house? She beat me out to the car. Literally.
Right.
And so we moved back up to Roscommon in 1993. And one thing I do have a little regret about is I was extremely active in Clare. I was the mayor and on the city commission in Clare, and very, very active in Rotary. I was the only two-time president of the Kiwanis, I said Rotary, of the Kiwanis Club that they ever had, and active in the Knights of Columbus and everything. And when I walked down the street, people would cross the street because I usually had 4 or 5 different tickets for things that I was selling, and that. But I said to my wife when we moved back to Roscommon that I wasn't going to be that active. We were going to have a little bit of time for ourselves to take rides and a vacation and things of that nature. And that's what I did. I'm not active basically in the community at all anymore. I don't belong to Rotary or any organization such as that. When I was in Clare, I was president of the Michigan Vocational Guidance Directors Association, Michigan Counselors Association, and on the Chamber of Commerce and everything. And sometimes you'd meet yourself going back to where you just came home from. And that, so I said when I moved back up here and we retired that we would have a little time to ourselves, and I pretty much followed that.
Yeah.
And I wished I didn't do it to that extent, but you know.
Right. But you have a group of gentlemen that have coffee together or something, and you talk about old times.
Oh yeah.
That's
I have coffee every day with friends. We meet out at the TP between 9 and 10, and 3 of the people that are there are former students. And that Lyle Mead, Vern Myers, Dave Doherty, and a couple other real good friends. We lost a couple people had coffee with us that passed away. That it's very, very sad.
Yeah.
And that's what happens, you know. You start losing people that have been good friends for years, and they pass away, and your group gets smaller and smaller.
Yeah.
And that. But we talk about things that happen. Vern raises pigeons, and he was on a basketball team here, and of course I knew all the kids that he played basketball with, as with Lyle, who played basketball, and Dave Doherty. Dave is on the Kirtland School Board, and he attends every basketball game for both the boys and the girls out at Kirtland. He loves basketball. He was a great ball player himself, and so he loves basketball.
Firebirds.
Yeah,
they're called the Firebirds, I think.
Yeah, right. So he goes to all of them. And I play poker with a group regularly. We're in a quiet stage right now, not playing because we lost a couple of fellas to death, and so we aren't playing at the present time. But if we pick up another member or two, we'll restart the poker group. When I played, this is interesting, maybe you might be interested in, and that we had a poker game going on, which was the apartment up above what is now the wine shop in the old Dunham Building.
That's the building I wanted you to tell me about.
Right, okay.
Okay, this is the story. Good.
Right. A nice gentleman by the name of Lorne Dunham had a meat market and a grocery store downstairs, which is the building now, which is the wine shop in the old Lorne Dunham Building. Lorne built that building, and there was a nice apartment
Do you know how long ago
upstairs.
He built it? Do you know when?
Well, I came here in the fall of '52, and it was up already, and he had his business running. My first year here, I worked for him as a meat cutter in the meat department, and the lady that taught me was a wonderful, wonderful lady, passed away right now. Her name was Dorothy Richardson, and her 2 sons have a roofing business here in the area. But Dorothy was a wonderful, wonderful woman, and small, slight lady, but yet she could hoist a quarter of beef on her shoulder and put it on a chopping block, and then we'd cut it up into steaks and everything such as that.
Dorothy Richardson.
Dorothy Richardson. I had her daughter in school, and her daughter now, married a gentleman by the name of Jack Maurer, and she owns the newspaper in Clare.
Oh.
And she's the editor and owns a newspaper in Clare. And she's a sister to the 2 Richardson boys that are really active in the Masons here and have a roofing business.
So that's Randy, and what's the other one's name?
I thought it was Jack, but I might be wrong.
Oh, okay.
And that, but anyway,
okay,
getting back to this building, I got to tell you, this was fun. I had the opportunity of joining a group that played poker up above Dunham's store, and the gentleman that lived in the apartment, and that was by the name of Golnick. And he was a good poker player, but he also was the justice of the peace. And a couple of fellows that I played poker with, they're gone right now, but were great guys. Bob Phillips, Red Murphy. I'll think of the others as we go along.
Okay.
But there we'd be playing poker. And since he was the justice of the peace, why, the state police pick up a violator and they would bring him up to the poker game. And so Sammy Golnick would excuse himself to the living room, take care of the case, come back and play poker, and the state police would come and kibitz the poker game.
No kidding. How fun. Wasn't that fun?
But it was fun. It was really interesting in that. Now, Sammy was crippled. He had a very bad back and but he was a graduate druggist from Ferris, but he didn't get his license because he wasn't able to do the physical things that working in a drugstore entail. But he was very, very intelligent, and consequently, a lot of people, when they needed a salve mixed or wanted some knowledge about a drug that would be good for a cold or that, they would go consult with Sammy, and Sammy would be able to tell them what to go to the drugstore and ask the druggist for help and whatever they particularly needed.
And he lived in that apartment?
He lived in that apartment till he died. He died after I left Roscommon, so I can't tell you what year it was that he passed away.
Was he a single man?
He was a single man, right. He still has relatives in the area, but I don't know how distant they are from him. But Lauren, who owned the building and rented the apartment to Sammy, didn't play poker.
Oh, Lauren didn't
no,
play?
No, Lauren didn't play in the game. Bob McGinnis, who has passed away now at the present time, that has gone.
Excuse me.
So most of the fellows that played there at the time I did have gone.
Was that a weekend thing?
No, it was every Monday night.
Oh, every Monday night.
Every Monday night, and it was a lot of fun.
Oh,
and then of
sure.
course I got involved in a poker group. That's my passion. Used to be my passion, playing poker. Wednesday night with a group, and we used to go out to Frank Rullo's place out in Keno and play poker there.
Frank who?
Frank Rullo.
Rullo.
R-O-U-L-O. Frank used to, at one time he was a state policeman, and one time he owned a grocery store on West Side Higgins Lake, and his wife taught the 3rd grade here in Roscommon. Wonderful lady, Charlotte Rullo. Well, Frank owned Snelly's Dog Food in Bay City for a long time. Then he got involved into real estate and had a real estate office in Grand Blanc, and then of course he passed away at the present time. And then I had bought a little building from Mary Lockery that's right on Lancewood Drive, and it is located on the river, Sable River. I bought a little building, belonged to Mary and her husband, and I converted it into a poker room, and for a couple years in warm weather we played poker out in my little cabin. I put a little sign out in front that said the HighLow Club, because we played high-low poker.
Well, how fun is that? How far out Lancewood is it?
Well, right now it would be right across where Mel McCutcheon lives, right on the river.
So is it still there?
Yeah, no, the building isn't there. Who's the gentleman that's a conservation man, retired, that he lives there in a house right on that piece of property. Very active. His wife is very active in the community.
Oh, Gary Bushell.
Yeah, Gary Bushell has a new house that's on that particular piece of property.
Oh, that's where you were, right there on the river. Right.
Before I came to the condo here, I went and saw him and told him that I owned that piece of property and that he has his house on, and if he wanted to sell it, I'd be interested in buying it from them because it had been my property. And then I added a little piece on. I had 212 feet of frontage on the Sabo, there where my little cabin was.
So did you tear the cabin down? Who tore it down?
A gentleman bought it by the name of John Servin, not Shervin, but his name was Servin. I never met the gentleman. When I left here to go to Central Michigan University, my brother-in-law Bill bought it. Bill Fisher, right. He bought it, and then later on, this gentleman, Mr. Servin, wanted to buy it, and Bill sold it to him.
He used to write for the paper, for the Roscommon paper, John Servin.
Oh, okay. Now we have on our recording Jeannie Carlson, Jeanne, who has entered the room.
So, but I can't remember, I'll ask Jeannie.
Okay. Okay, well that's interesting. That's very interesting. How long did you do that? The whole 10 years you were here pretty much?
Well, no, I didn't buy that building till I saved up a little money. I bought the building probably in 55 until, probably 62.
Who did you buy it from? Do you remember?
I bought it from Mary Lockery.
Oh, yeah, you said.
Yeah, I bought it from Mary Lockery. Her father had built it.
Oh, John had built it.
Her father had built it.
Her father was...
Her father, Mary Lockery, had built that little building.
Was Walker.
Right. Had a wonderful fireplace in it, and that. I got to tell you something interesting in that. One night it was broken into, and nothing was stolen, but it was a bunch of kids from school, and so they stacked up all their beer cans that they drank and so forth in a couple of pyramids on the counter, and because they were very nice and they didn't break anything in that, they left me a six-pack for myself for the use of the room.
For gosh sakes. That is really something.
Yeah, right. I don't know who did it. I could guess, but I won't do that.
They never told you?
No, they never told me. I never did have a name as to broke in. And I had to break one window to get in. But
you knew all the kids in school by then.
Oh, yeah. I used to pride
So you had a good idea.
I used to pride myself when I taught here, is after 3 days I knew the name of every kid in all my classes, what the names of their parents were, and that type of thing held even when I did taught classes at Central. After the third meeting, I knew the name of every person that I had in class, what town they were from, and whether they were married. But I wish my memory were like that now, but it isn't. But I did. People used to marvel that I could remember names like that. I knew the names of the brothers and sisters of every kid that I had in school in Roscommon, the names of their parents. And part of the thing that I did here, too, I was the bus supervisor when I was here. And so I planned the routes and everything such as that, took care of the bills and all the other things such as that. And so consequently, I knew where the kids lived. And it's interesting. I think that when you are a teacher, you should have an idea where all your children live. And when I went to Clare as the guidance director, I was able to persuade the superintendent that on indoctrination day, the first day of school or so, that we take a bus and introduce all the new school personnel where the school district boundaries were and an idea where kids live. And it gives you a little different perspective on your children and everything such as that. For example, I don't mean to belittle anybody or anything, but you get to a home where is 1.5 rooms with an outside toilet, and the kid is struggling in school and having a difficult time, and your first reaction if he misbehaves is to probably punish him. Well, if you know the conditions that he lives in and what a time he is having even getting to school, it's different.
Yeah, look at it different. Exactly.
Yeah.
Yeah. Great.
We had a little
Did you do that bus work? Was that part of your regular salary? Did you get paid extra for that?
I got paid extra for that. Yeah, I got paid extra for doing the bus work, and I do that after school. And
how many buses did they have back then?
At that point in time, we had 8 regular routes and 2 kindergarten routes, And then I used to drive the bus to go to, I'd drive the spectator bus to go to the ball games. And I'd have a load of kids to go to the ball games. And I substituted on the routes. So I knew every route where every kid lived that was on a bus route at that particular time. I can tell you this, the only deer that I ever hit in my life was on a school bus route, and was on Art O'Connor's route, which went way the devil out on McMaster's Bridge Road and then wound up. So the youngsters that were there, the name escapes me right at the present time, two little youngsters, one in first grade and one in kindergarten, and that when they came to school, I was picking them up at 6 in the morning to get them into school, and they were the first ones on the bus and the last ones delivered at nighttime. So when those poor little buggers fell asleep in class, you could understand it. They came to school. They came to school so early, and they were little kids. Tubbs was the last name, and that they were probably closer to Mile than they were to us. And that at the time. Well, anyway, I was going out there with the empty bus to pick up the Tubbs children, and 5 deer came across in front of me as I was going downhill. I was able to swerve, which I shouldn't have done, but I did swerve. And if one deer didn't fall down, I would have missed them all. But one deer fell down coming down, and I broke his hip. And so I stopped the bus, and I went and picked him up and put him on the floor of the bus. And that, and of course, being very naive, I thought, well, I could take him over to DNR and they could splint his leg. Well, you can't do that with a wild animal. But anyway, the kids all hopped on the bus, and they'd pet the deer as they would come in and take their seats and everything like that. Well, I took the deer over to the DNR, the regional office and that, and I thought, well, you know, they might be able to splint the deer up and everything like that, maybe have them in a pen until their leg healed, but sadly that night they shot him. But that's
I'm surprised he laid still in the bed. In the bus.
Well, of course, with the back hip broken,
he couldn't do much.
He couldn't do much, you know, and everything like that.
You couldn't give it to the family so they can have it for dinner.
Well, of course, I thought that it could be salvaged.
Yeah.
And but it couldn't. The only deer I ever hit in my life.
That's pretty awesome for as much as you've lived up here.
Yeah, right. But anyway, the kids really got a big kick out of it. Oddly enough, that was during hunting season too, and so I used to get teased about that. Said, "Well, why didn't you kill it? It was hunting season. You could have had the meat."
Did you fish or hunt when you're up here?
I hunted when I first came. And that, but I don't like kill animals. I don't kill anything. The only reason I went hunting was to go with the guys at the poker group, and that's we could play poker. Al Shervin was the other poker player, and I used to come up and go to his cottage out on Lake Margreath. And interesting about coming up for hunting season for a couple days, I'd go hunting, is everybody considered themselves a master cook, and they all wanted to be the cook, and so they tried to outvie each other on the meal that they prepared. Now, not Elwin, but Darrell Matheson and Dole Figley hunted, but they also used to gather turtles all year, and then they'd have a couple big meals, and they'd cook at hunting group, and so the meals were positively fantastic. And that, because they all wanted to...
You only went as far as Lake Margreath to do this?
I went to Lake Margreath at Al's when I came up from Clare to go hunting out there. And and like I say, I came up for the food and playing poker.
Sure.
I didn't care for the hunting.
I
did go out and and stood in a spot and took a nap under a tree. I really wasn't interested in killing anything, so no. I'm not a hunter.
And you didn't fish either?
Oh yeah, I did fishing, but nothing like a skilled fisherman. I just get my little boat and put the anchor down and throw out a line, and I'd have my dog in the fishing boat, and and the dog would go swim, and I'd have to haul him up into the boat, and it was fun.
Did you fish at Higgins mostly?
Higgins Lake, right? Higgins Lake, yeah. Well, I fished outside my little cottage there on the ensemble too.
Oh,
I'd
sure.
catch a couple little brookies.
Did you stay there like for the summer in that little cabin?
No, never stayed. Never.
Oh.
I never spent the night there except the opening day of fishing season.
Oh.
It's the only time I ever spent any time there.
How little was it?
One big room.
One big room.
One big room. We had a counter with the little kitchen area and with a stove there, and then the living room wasn't too big, and with a table, and there was no sleeping arrangement there, and that I had to put a chair out there. You could sleep in a chair. But it was basically unfurnished when I bought it. I left it that way, except for the poker table and chairs.
Right.
And
And there was no bathroom then?
no, there was no bathroom. No.
How fun. And 212 feet on the river.
Well, it wasn't originally 212 feet. It was about 150. But I bought a portion of the land that belonged to. I'm trying to think of what his last name is. I can't think of the fellow I bought 50 feet from Dad on. It squared him up, and it gave me a little bit of a square property too, more square, because it was pie-shaped. Not very much on the road, and most of your frontage was on the river.
Nice. That's a nice spot on the river.
It was a nice piece of property. I always kidded my brother-in-law. I said he became on his way to becoming a millionaire by buying that piece of property from me.
Bill Fisher?
Yeah.
Let's talk a little bit more. I want to ask about who you taught with those 10 years that you were here. Who were some of
the other teachers that were here? Well, some of the other teachers were here were a nice gentleman from out in Boston, was here the first 5 years I was, Tony DeLuna, my good buddy Clyde Schultz, who persuaded me to come here, and that taught here, and he spent his entire teaching career here in the community. And that, see, when Clyde and I graduated, you couldn't find a teaching job. We were young veterans, and all kinds of veterans were graduating at that time in 1950. And so Clyde couldn't find a teaching job. I was lucky because I found a job in social work, and Clyde went back to work in the mines.
Oh, did he?
And he worked in the mines his first 2 years out of college until this job came up in Roscommon where he could teach Spanish. Then he called me, and I came up and taught too, and I made my teaching certificate good. And I'm glad I did, because I met my wife here, and we married at St. Michael's, and it worked out extremely well for me. Really good experiences. I got my real estate license, made a lot of friends, indulged my passion of playing poker a couple times a week. And
what was that name of the gentleman from Boston?
Tony DeLuna.
How do you spell
Tony
that?
DeLuna. He Diluna, and Tony taught math. Very well liked and very fine math teacher. Okay, some of the
Who
other.
was the principal when you were teaching?
Well, Earl Haight was the principal when I came here, but actually speaking, the superintendent, Mr. Hulse, kept his hands, and basically speaking, he was the principal and the superintendent on it. Earl did the attendance and a couple other things, but he was busy with all the sports, and so Hulse actually acted as the principal and took care of the discipline too.
Oh, really? So Mr. Haight was more the athletic director?
Yes, he took care of the athletics and the personal coaching. And let's see, who else was teaching at the time? Ralph Ostling came at the same time I did and taught shop and drafting, and did a very fine job. And he retired from teaching after I left, and then he went on to become a state representative. And that I served on the township board out in Garish Township with Ralph. I was a trustee, and Ralph was the township clerk, and Ralph was very, very efficient. In fact, I always used to say with Ralph that when he was building a house or putting a foundation or anything in the way of house construction, you could have set up bleachers, you could have sold tickets to watch him work. He was so fast and so efficient that you would have paid to watch him work.
No
That's
kidding.
how good he was.
I'll tell Thela.
So good, yep. Pardon? Well, I told Thela knows that. He was a tremendous worker. Anybody that had work done by Ralph had it done by a Serb professional that really took pains to make sure everything was right. I would have paid admission to sit in the bleachers to watch him work, and that he was really, really good. We had a nice art teacher, Joe Bagan, for a couple of years. The first art teacher when I first came here was called Art Tangy, and he was but he was very, very good art teacher, and he taught kids different things that most art teachers don't teach. And
like what?
But he only stayed 1 year.
Oh.
Well, he at that time he's introduction to pottery, and he taught a little bit about fine art history with the different types of painters that they were at that point in time, and of course then you do the traditional things with the kids. But he did a few of the other things, and let's see who else was there. Mrs. Bird, Joanna Ray was the English teacher at that time, very fine lady. Science, Earl Haight taught the science class, and that the business teachers varied, but for the last couple of years that I was here, B. Cornell was the business teacher, and she lived in Grayling. Her husband had an insurance and real estate business in Grayling, had been a former coach at Grayling High School. Very, very fine lady. See, that's about all I can remember. Oh, Jim Mahoney was the vocal music teacher, and the band teachers varied. Ernie Potts was the band teacher when I first came here, and Henry Verberkermost then came in the last 3 or 4 years that I was here. He was the band teacher. He went on to become the superintendent of schools up in the little town of Lake Linden, which is just 3 miles from my hometown.
Near Lorium, yeah, that's right.
Just 3 miles from Lorium.
Well, that's pretty good. You think we've covered most of your...
Well, I can tell you anecdotes on just about anything, but you'd have to ask me the questions because I can't think of what I would like to say. But all in all, I had great experience.
You're full of good stories.
Pardon?
You're full of good stories. Where did the Rotary meet when you were...
The Rotary met at the Colonial, and the lady that had the Colonial bar was passed away, and it was Jeannie's ex-husband, Mary Green, ran the Colonial bar, and the lady that ran the Colonial restaurant when I was here was named Alta Frank, and her son lives just a short distance from me, Bill Frank, and she ran a real nice restaurant with good meals and everything. And Mary, who ran the Colonial Hotel bar, who Woody Lockery owned it, but she ran it for him, and that ran a very nice, efficient bar. They had dancing there every Friday and Saturday night, and that. I got to tell you this anecdote. It isn't a very pleasant one, but I got to tell you. I came up one time to visit my in-laws, and I went to a coin show with Eddie Shervin. And we went down to Bay City, and on the way home, I said, well, let's stop at the Cedar Inn in St. Helen and have a couple beers. So we did. Well, Eddie didn't drink, but I had a couple beers, and my God, it was like old home week. I hit the Cedar Inn, and all the kids that I had in school at one time or another, drinks were coming so fast and furious. So anyway, we had to leave. So this was on a Saturday night. So then we came to the Colonial. And I said, well, Eddie, we got to have one more for the road. That was a mistake. And so we went into the Colonial, and the same thing happened. This was probably one of the 2 times in my life that I ever had too much to drink and got drunk. And that. So I got back to the house, with my in-laws and everything like that. And my poor mother-in-law commiserated and said, oh, my poor daughter, she married a heavy drinker. But I'll never forget that night. And that, well, that's where everybody in Roscommon went for dancing,
Well, sure.
All the kids at that time had reached the age of 21, that I had in school, and so they were all there at the Colonial.
After you were just up here visiting.
I was just up here visiting, right?
So.
I was up here visiting, right? Yeah.
Great.
Yeah.
Well, I think we did pretty. Do you think we covered most everything?
Well, unless there's anything specifically that you can
I
think of.
Mostly I wanted you to tell us about the postcards and all that, so I think we did all right.
I used to take the kids when I taught driver ed in the summertime. Mr. Pappenfuss was very good. He let me use his cottage grounds out on Higgins Lake, and so every kid that I had in driver ed and that got to go swimming out at the Pappenfuss cottage at summertime because he allowed me to use the grounds and that. And Jimmy Papp, who was a fine basketball player, a wonderful kid, he retired from teaching out at Tawas, and that taught me how to water ski. And the one thing I was proud of, there was only one youngster that I missed in Roscommon that I taught driver ed in 9 years that missed night driving. But I took every kid that I ever taught, always had experience of night driving.
Great.
And we'd drive to the ball games, take 4 or 5 kids in a drive ed car, drive to the ball games, eat out supper at, whatever town we're in, at some restaurant in that town, and so it's a good experience.
Where was Pappenfuss Cottage at the lake?
Pappenfuss Cottage was just a little bit to the north of Flag Point.
On Pine Bluffs?
On Pine Bluffs, right. Exactly that subdivision, Pine Bluffs. Yeah, very, very nice. And that, yeah. Since we're on that, I'll keep going on Pine Bluffs.
That's all right.
May had a friend that had a listing. There wasn't a formal listing again like with May. Everything was a handshake. And she had a nice cottage. It's 100 feet of frontage for $16,000. That'd be $500,000 now. But anyway, she told me about it. I took a gentleman that owned a Ford garage in Flint out to see it. And he was Lebanese. And he was a little bit dark. And his wife was a little bit dark complexioned. And had a couple of beautiful little children, that were dark complexioned. Well, the lady's brother that owned a particular cottage was there, and he was the most impolite person that you ever saw in your life when I showed it. And so the gentleman said to me, he said, Larry, he said, I have never been treated so rudely by anybody in my life. He said, you aren't treating me rudely. You're trying to overcome that guy.
He was the owner or the neighbor?
No, he was a brother to the lady that owned it.
Oh, the brother to the lady.
Brother to the lady that owned it. Now, whatever his reason was, it came out later. Well, anyway, he complained to May Malone, and his sister complained to May Malone and said, your salesman showed it to a Jewish family. Now, Jewish families are not allowed to buy property on Higgins Lake. Therefore, you cannot show my property anymore. Well, needless to say, I lost the friend. The gentleman was very nice, and he went and bought a place on the west side of the lake. So we lost the listing, even though it was only a verbal listing, and we lost the sale because the people interpreted that he was Jewish, and that he wasn't. He was Lebanese. I won't mention his name because the family name is still operating, and they might own the place yet on the other side of Higgins Lake, although that was in the 50s, so, that's a long time ago. But, they had deed restrictions on property on Higgins Lake that you couldn't sell to blacks or you couldn't sell to Jewish people. If you look at an old deed out there, you'll find that that's right in it.
No kidding.
It's right on the papers. It's illegal, of course, but it was still in writing on the old deeds that you couldn't sell. Joe Louis tried to buy a place on Higgins Lake and wasn't allowed. Nobody was allowed to sell to Joe Louis.
No kidding.
And that.
Never heard that before, Larry. That's a good story.
Yeah, it is. Well, that's very true. I don't know what area on this side of the lake that Joe Louis wanted. Was interested in buying, but they could not sell to him. And that no, couldn't sell. But on the old deeds or the old abstracts and that, if you go to look at a couple, you'll still find that clause in there that you weren't able to sell to Jewish people or you weren't able to sell to blacks on Higgins Lake.
No kidding. Gee, I never heard that before. That's terrible.
Well, even to this day, I doubt if you will find very many blacks. I doubt if there'd be a handful of blacks on Higgins Lake. You might find people of the Jewish faith on Higgins Lake but at that time you couldn't, and it was sad in that because I would have sold that property in the morning. I don't care about that, but I would have sold it to the gentleman had he been just polite. The house would have sold, and of course,
Isn't that something?
would have been a month's salary.
Yeah, right.
Well, more than a month's salary,
Right,
actually.
would have been great,
Speaking
yeah.
as a commission and that, but a lot of crazy little incidents, but some incidents involve people, and so maybe we better not.
Right. Okay.
And that.
Well, you've done very well. And, you know, it's nice that you were able to come back, and you are so involved with the history of the local area. So,
Well,
any
to
more
a
things
little-
you want to tell us?
to a little
If you
degree,
think about
no,
later,
I'm very,
let us know.
very happy. My wife died in, as I say, in 2003, and we had 10 good years after we came back to Roscommon, and you can't beat that. There are two brothers live here. Yet Jim, my brother-in-law Jim, retired from teaching here in Roscommon. The first year of teaching here, he stayed with Clare and I.
Oh,
He
did
lived with us for the first year, and Bill enjoyed it here. He retired. I sold Bill a lot of property. It's just a crazy little aside and everything such as that. Bill bought a lot of property from me, and I got him involved in a couple pieces of property and that, and so he did extremely well on them. So I like to kid him about that. Of course, I can't kid him now, poor Bill, but
Yeah. It's not too bad, isn't it?
yeah.
Okay, well, I think that we did well. I think.
Well, I hope we did. I hope we covered.
I hope it's all on here.
Was it all
Hour
right?
and 20 minutes.
I'll be done.
So I thank you very kindly, and the Historical Society thanks you.
Oh, thank you.
I
Okay.